Alright guys, let's move on the discussions to the first power given to the public authority under subsidiary legislations or delegated legislations. Why we say it as delegated? Because this power is delegated by the legislature. And we know that under the doctrine of separation of power, the functions of legislature is to make law, to make legislations, but in administrative law, it go against that because the legislature has delegated their power to the executive or to the administrator. So, what is subsidiary legislations? Okay, sometime when I mention delegated legislations, this is also referring to subsidiary legislations. Alright, according to the Interpretation Act 1967, subsidiary legislations is any proclamations, rule, regulations, order, notifications, bylaw, or other instrument made under any ordinance, enactment, or other lawful authority and having legislative effect. Okay. When we discuss on subsidiary legislations, so later you will come across the term rule, regulations, order, bylaw in a problem-based questions. And apart from that, some cases mentions this subsidiary legislation as the circular. Okay, so this is referring to the instruments made under any or under any ordinance, enactment, and so on. Okay, what are the rationales having this subsidiary legislation? Why we need to delegate the power of a legislature to the public authority? Okay, first point, the legislative power is delegated to another person or body other than parliament, okay, or under authority granted to that person by an act of parliament. Okay, this is not simply happens because in order to exercise the functions of legislature, public authority must be conferred the power by the act of parliament. In other words, by parent act. Okay. So the rationale is it is impossible to legislate all matters in our day-to-day activities in any one piece of legislations. Okay, they are so burden of words. Okay, they have many things to do, then they have to delegate some of their powers to the public authority or to the executive. Next point, okay, there is a lack of time and then the expertise in the legislature to provide laws necessary to solve a certain social or economic problems. Okay, so they just give the power to draft certain rules, regulations, order, bylaw. Okay, not the whole act of parliament. Okay, so please refer to these definitions of subsidiary legislation. Okay, so we have thought about the doctrine of ultra vires, okay, under the substantive and procedural part. Okay, now we are going to look into the grounds for review of subsidiary legislations. Okay, because the public authority have the power to make subsidiary legislation, then we need to we need to control, we need to review whether the subsidiary legislation made by them is valid or not. So how to review based on these grounds of ultra vires. Alright, so based on this chart, okay, as you can see here, there are two categories, okay, as we discussed just now. Under substantive law, known as substantive ultra vires. Substantive, this is where we look into the content of the law, the requirements, and what the power authorized the public authority to do. Okay, under the first ground, it can be divided into three parts. First, we look into the first ground under unconstitutionality of Parent Act or subsidiary legislations, where Parent Act itself ultra vires the constitutions. Constitutions here referring to the federal constitutions of Malaysia. The second ground is subsidiary legislation ultra vires constitutions. Next, under subsidiary legislations, ultra vires Parent Act. Parent Act is the one who give the power, confer the power to the public authority to make subsidiary legislation. Okay, next, under extended or implied ultra vires, which can be divided into three grounds, under retrospective effect, under exclusion or ouster clause, followed by financial levy, unreasonableness, and last but not is under procedural ultra vires, whereby there is non-compliance with express procedures laid down by the Parent Act. Okay, so let's continue our discussions under the substantive ultra vires. Alright, under substantive ultra vires, this refers to the grounds of review whereby the court may examine the scope, extent, and range of power delegated to a public authority by the statute to make subsidiary legislation. So we will look into the Parent Act that conferred the power to the public authority. So the limits of the power must not be crossed. Meaning to say that they have the power to draft the subsidiary legislation, but it cannot be crossed. Otherwise, it will be considered as substantive ultra vires. What is the effects of ultra vires? It is null and void. Okay guys, example. Minister A is given power by Statute B, Statute B here referring to Parent Act, to make subsidiary legislation relating to traffic offences. So this is the power conferred to Minister A to make subsidiary legislation. Okay, what is the subject matter? Regarding the traffic offences. Sorry, yeah. If Minister A use Statute B to make subsidiary legislation relating to accidents at construction sites, then the subsidiary legislation made by them will be invalid. Why it is invalid? Because they only have power to make subsidiary legislation regarding the traffic offences, but if they make the subsidiary legislation regarding the accidents at construction site, so it will be invalid because it has gone beyond the scope conferred by Statute B. So traffic offence. Then the subsidiary legislation is substantive ultra vires. So you must understand the meaning of substantive ultra vires. When the public authority go beyond of the power conferred to them, when they go beyond of the scope conferred by the Parent Act. Okay, before we continue the grounds, let's take a break first.